Quick entry for today. I'm rereading the book Body by Science by Doug McGuff and John Little. I'm going to be doing a podcast later on May 19th with Doug McGuff. I'm really excited about. So I thought in preparation for that I would reread this book. I read it at least twice, maybe more than that, since then, and I've often referred to it. It's one of the better, certainly, books on exercise and health, fitness that I've read in a long time. And one of the things that he talks about at the beginning is that he defines fitness, and I'll go into that in more detail, and I'll compare his definition, not of fitness, but his definition of exercise. He also defines health, that's worth an entry in itself, and talks about how when you define something, and Ken Hutchins' definition, we'll compare the two, and also I'm going to see if I can find a definition by Brian Johnson, or at least a critique of these definitions. Not everybody will agree with the definitions, but it's very important to have a definition. Because one of the things in the book that Doug talks about, Doug and John, is that they started to write this book and they started to look for definitions of health and definitions of fitness, definitions of exercise, and found that these things were actually not defined. Doctors can define a pathology when something's wrong with your health, but there's no real great definition of health. But anyways, on the topic of exercise and the lack of definitions, which is rampant, people think of activity, any activity really, as exercise, if you're moving in some way, shape, or form. And the fact is, if you think of exercise as something that you do, and I'll go into his definition in a later post, in order to improve your physical condition, then activity, if you're completely sedentary, which of course, in our modern age that we live in, many of us have a lot of labor-saving devices. We have more food than we know what to do with, and we often consume way more than we should. So if you start from doing next to nothing, then any amount of activity will show an improvement. And so we make the mistake, because if you're doing no activity and you do some, that activity is good. And then we continue to do. If you do get that, then the thinking is that even more activity will be even better. But in fact, you don't have to go very far in our past, before we had all the labor-saving devices, to realize that people who worked long hours and did grueling hard labor typically worked themselves to an early death by overdoing things. So just because we've gone the other way, and the analogy that Doug and John use is the analogy of, if a little bit is good, then more is better, is somebody who is watching a tide coming in and records how far the tide comes in after half an hour, after an hour, after 2 hours, and then concludes that in so many hours into the future that the entire world will be covered in water, because they haven't looked at it in context, because of course the tide goes in and the tide goes out. I get off on a little bit of tangent on that, on much of what is used as modeling these days in terms of predicting the future. But anyways, the idea is activity can only serve to improve your conditioning if you're going from doing next to nothing to then suddenly doing something. After that, you have to improve the quality of the activity, and the quality of activity would be defined by the amount of intensity. And you want to look for, as the book says, not how much exercise can you withstand, but how little exercise is needed in order to get the desired effect, so that you're going to get an adaptation that's favorable as far as becoming more able to withstand the stresses of your daily life without inflicting wear and tear on your body, so that there's a negative effect from that. Anyways, more on this later. Thank you for listening, and subscribing to the YouTube channel always is appreciated. Bye for now.